Great. All right, everybody. Thank you for joining our third day of technical working groups for the phase 4 to discuss the ramp and GRC data templates. And today PG&E is going to lead us through our conversation. But first, we'll go through a quick safety message. And yeah, stay safe when DIYing home renovations, right? The National Center for Biotechnology Information reports that more injuries have happened in non-occupational settings than in occupational ones. And that includes about 960,000 injuries yearly. So proper power tool safety practices can reduce the risk of injury and keep you and those around you safe. Here's a couple of tips for trying to keep everybody safe around the power tools. Wear appropriate safety gear. Always wear protective equipment, including safety goggles, gloves, and hearing protection to shield yourself from flying debris, noise, and accidental contact. Are you okay, Elijah? Did you have a question about power tools?
I'll share a personal experience. I'll say also kind of take it through and think through step by step. I do a lot of DIY at home, and it was a couple months ago now. I almost ripped my fingernails off because I was trying to tighten a bit down, and the way you do it quickly is to hold on to the tip and spin it, which is safe if you have gloves on. If you do not have gloves on, obviously that pulls at your fingers right there, and it hurt like hell. So yes, take your time and wear appropriate safety gear.
I'm really sorry. I don't want to laugh at that. That's a very serious injury, and I hope your fingernails. It probably didn't come back, did it?
No, fortunately, it didn't go all the way off. It just ripped pretty
good.
deep, just a bit of blood, and then it grew off in a month or so.
Okay.
So,
sorry about that. Yeah.
happens.
Another thing to do is to inspect your tools before you use them. So you should be checking for frayed cords, loose parts, or damage, and don't use tools that show signs of wear or malfunction until they are repaired or replaced. Use tools as intended. So only use tools for their design purpose and follow the manufacturer's instructions to avoid accidents or damage. Make sure to unplug when not in use. Disconnect power tools when changing blades, bits, or performing maintenance to prevent accidental starts. We have a little OSHA webpage for extra information about power tools safety as well for everybody's interest. Throwing that in the chat helps to make sure the chat's working as well. So let's see, we're gonna move along here. And I just want to make sure that everybody realizes that the meeting is recorded. One or more decision makers may be present during the meeting, but no decisions will be taken. And as far as I know, there's not a decision maker in the meeting at the moment. No, not that I can see. And let's do a quick roll call, though. Let's see, is PG&E on the line?
PG&E is here.
Great. Is anyone from SCE on the line?
Yes, Southern California Edison is on the line. Thank you.
Great. Anyone from Turn on the line? Okay. Anyone from Sempra Companies on the line?
Morning, Eddie. We're on the line.
Okay, thanks, Josh. And Public Advocate's Office?
Yes, we are here.
And anyone from EPUC-IS, Energy Producers and Users Coalition, Indicated Shippers? Okay. Anyone from Muskie Grade Road Alliance? Or Protect Our Communities Foundation? Or the Utility Consumers Action Network? And are there any other parties that would like to be represented? And if so, you can raise your hand or you can add your name in the chat. Great. Let's just go over the attendee participation real quick. If you have IT related questions, please contact, I believe, let's see, we have Blake and I think there was somebody else that was still, oh, Jacob was on the line as well. If you guys can put your emails in the chat, I'd really appreciate it. Folks can reach out to them if you have any trouble, although Teams has been working pretty well, I think, so far. And then attendees have the ability to mute and unmute themselves. We do ask that everyone stay muted, except during the Q&A period. We'll try to let PG&E kind of work through their presentation first. There's lots of time. We'll have lots of time today for Q&A. And, if you do have a question, you can always enter it in the chat while PG&E is presenting, and then we can always get back to it after the presentation is finished. And if there's not enough time to respond to all chat box questions, SPD will collect the answers and then circulate them to the service list. During the discussion period, please use the raise hand or hand raise function, and I'll try to call on everybody in the order that they come in. And then it seems like Teams has been pretty good about lowering people's hands after they finish their question, but if not, please remember to lower your hand after you finish. Let's see. Like I said, the agenda is pretty fixed. We're just going to let PG&E run through their slide deck for the first few minutes, and then it'll be a pretty open discussion. We'll have a break at 11, and then we'll come back and wrap up any remaining questions. Just a reminder that Cal Advocates will be presenting tomorrow, and then SPD will be presenting on Thursday. And then we'll decide on Thursday towards the close of SPD's presentation whether we want to continue the discussion for Friday. All right, I tried to get through that in 5 minutes. Didn't quite get there, but we're close. So Elijah, I'm going to turn it over to you, and you can go ahead and start sharing your slides.
Are you able to see it?
Got it.
All
Okay.
right.
So let's get started. So first off, good morning, everyone. Yumi Boom here, and Elijah and myself, Vincent Lowe, representing PG&E. And we're pleased to be here today to talk about our RAMP template proposal. When we first, sat down and thought about these templates, right, we actually were kind of racking our brains, just like, oh, what do we want to see? How do we want to present the information? And then Suni on Yumi's team is like, we have this transparency proposal. We put a lot of work into that. It has a lot of the information that I believe parties are looking for. It was one of those, kind of light bulb moments. It's like, yeah, we did all that work. It's like, this would be a great way to kind of realize those economies of scale, the work that we've done before. And so, we use that as our kind of starting basis for our RAMP data templates. You can see that on the left of this chart, there are basically the tables that are created from the transparency proposal. They consist of 3 tables: the risk results table, risk sensitivity table, and the risk model listing table. And for just an FYI for everyone, the transparency proposal was something that was first discussed in phase 1 of this proceeding, and then subsequently in phase 3 was brought up again. And out of phase 3, PG&E was ordered to do a pilot of the transparency proposal. We did that pilot. We filed it in R.20-07-013 on August 5th. So you can access the results that we have. It was actually piloted on some of our RAMP risks, so that results from that pilot that parties have access to. So the next thing that we did was, we looked at the transparency tables. And then as parties know, we have a proposal out there for the RRE, right? The scope work definition workshop 1. And so our next kind of line of thinking was like, how do we kind of build on what we've done to take into account the proposal that we put out there for scope work? So basically, we did that by thinking about this RRU supplemental table, putting together a draft version of it, I should say. And basically, the idea is that the RRU supplemental table is an additional table that will work with the transparency proposal to kind of implement our proposal for RRUs. I should say the joint IOUs. This represents PG&E's kind of attempt to incorporate the joint IOUs RRU proposal. So just a refresher on the risk results table, which is a table that contains, we believe, the results that parties here will be interested in. risk results table is basically it's kind of keyed by, you can see here I kind of drew a circle around it, but there are actually few more keys than that. It's keyed by risk, tranche, year, mitigation, and then attribute, right? So those are the keys for this particular table. And then the value is the value that you are reporting. We've also included some other results type from from the transparency proposal. So estimate quality and then confidence interval. So you can see here that basically the result type is something you can specify. And in the transparency proposal itself, we kind of listed different result types that you might want to see, right? Like the risk before, pre-mitigation risk after. Excuse me, my eyesight's really bad, so I can't even see on the screen here. But basically, the likelihood before treatment, before risk mitigations, the consequence score before exposure, risk after loss. So these are all result types. And the idea is that the result types, this is a set that we put forward in the transparency proposal, but the result types can be extended rather easily, right? It's just another field or whatever. It's not even a field, it's just another kind of value you can put into the result type. So the data tables is quite flexible. For example, it's like not saying that we should do this, but one of the things is like, this data transparency proposal was designed before we moved to these different discounting scenarios. So perhaps one way to account for different discounting scenarios is just to have more result types extended to include a different discounting scenario. So like, for example, the risk after could be a risk after dash discount scenario 1 or something like that. So it's pretty easy to extend the results type to include more values. So the reason we circle the particular data columns there, you can see, is that we were thinking of using that as a join to potential RRU information that kind of works with our proposal. So if there are no other questions on this table, I can move to the next slide. Doesn't seem like it. Okay. So here is basically a attempt, right, to bring in this RRU information. So I want to just give like a brief overview of PG&E's RRU. I'm sorry, I say PG&E, but I meant a joint IOU's RRU proposal. Basically, the idea, in that proposal is that, we'll make whatever information we have at the granularity that's available at the time of the filing, right? Whenever we do our GRC filing, for example, we might not know all the projects that we're working on in detail. But then the idea is that later on, as we get closer to when those projects actually will be implemented, we will have more information and we can come back and fill in the information regularly scheduled updates of this RRU table. So that's basically the idea of that. And then to go along with the risk results table, you can see that the RRU table, is going to be joined based on the circle yellow that you see there. So it's going to be joined on risk, tranche, year, and mitigation name. And then that joins you by the risk results table. And then the additional fields kind of represent some of the things that we are also in the joint IOU RRU proposal. The name of the RRU, description, status. The two other kind of columns in there, there's a column for RRU estimated contribution and estimated cost. Those are, once again, this is our attempt. It's our attempt to put this together. I think it's a starting point, right? I feel like, a lot of these tables, a lot of these reports, we have to start somewhere. It's not a final by any means. We need to try this stuff out so that we make sure that, this stuff actually works out, right? This is something that we haven't done before. But anyway, the idea is that fields like estimated cost, estimated contribution, those represent a percentage of the overall program values that we would have calculated, perhaps in the GRC or in the RAP, right? And so that's what those fields represent. So any questions? I think basically this is our presentation. So I think perhaps it's just time to open it up to questions.
And we do also have a demo that we can do using the transparency proposal.
Yeah.
So that can also be next if we don't want to pause here.
When you say demo, did you just mean the Excel spreadsheet?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think I'll definitely have a couple of questions related to that, but I wanted to first open up the floor to see if there was any questions that folks had. Yep, go ahead, Ami.
Hello, everyone. So actually, I have a question for this slide. And you mentioned that actually in the first line, association of RRU to mitigation is achieved by joining on the key risk tranche year mitigation name. I believe that RRU is more granular than combination of these four, meaning that one tranche can have several RRUs. So do you have an explanation for that? How do you envision that, basically?
So basically, yeah. So for example, here, right under the circle, right, you see it's RRU name. So basically, RRU number 1, RRU number 2, RRU number 3, but they will all roll up to the same risk tranche year mitigation name, right? So that's how it's this table. The things in the circle help you to roll up to the mitigation. So yeah, it does account for the fact that you can have more than one RRU in a risk tranche year mitigation name.
So basically, you provided the follow-up question. You provided a list of RRU names for each risk tranche year mitigation name, correct?
Yeah. So for example, RRU name might be project. I don't know what RRU name is. Project number 1, project number 2, project number 3. They all work on the same risk. They all work on the same tranche. They all this is the calculation for that particular year, and they all roll up to the same mitigation. So that's how it works. It rolls up.
Okay. And last follow-up. Sorry. The last question would be, so the rest of the table is based on so RRU is just one, then RRU name for each of them, and for the rest of the table is based on that RRU name, correct?
Yes. Yep.
Okay, thank you.
Actually, I'm going to ask Yumi to maybe pull up the Excel spreadsheet real quick, because I think that last question that Amin asked about the RRU name is kind of important. And I just want to make sure that, what we see is that the RRU name in this example is there's only one name actually, but essentially PG&E is spreading the costs of that project. I mean, you guys didn't provide an estimated cost here, but you would have a different cost for each year, essentially. Is that correct?
Yeah, so basically, I'm thinking this particular example, install cameras. Maybe one year we're installing cameras, different set of cameras. Another year we're installing. Maybe one year we're installing cameras where the dam is. Another we're installing cameras where what's the bottom of the dam called?
Belden Forebay.
Whatever. Yeah, Forebay. Yeah, exactly. So it's like maybe we're installing at different places. So that's why you could have different ROUs in different years.
So it could be
In Stockhead.
something like this.
Yeah.
Well, would the RRU actually change though? Because I guess that's kind of the question is it a different RRU at each year?
It could be or couldn't be, right?
Depends.
I mean, some projects will obviously take longer than a year. And
right.
some might be done in 2 weeks or whatever. We're installing cameras. So maybe that's done in 2 weeks. So, so yeah, there's flexibility to.
Okay, great. Yeah, that's a helpful question, and I think it helps clarify. Like, at least the way that Yumi has now changed it, it essentially looks like there's 9 different RRUs, and there's just one per year. But if you kind of undid all the changes that Yumi just did, it would be one RRU spread out over 9 years.
Yeah.
So I just wanted to make sure that in your guys' mind, all of those are possible.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Does that make sense? I mean, yeah. Okay. Cool. I see a thumbs up. Let's see. Are there? Yeah. I mean, did you have any other follow-up questions? No. Good to go. Okay. Any other questions that folks wanted to ask before you get my? Yeah. Great. Thanks, Wendy.
Yeah, I wanted to ask about the RRU estimated contribution a little more. So it says in the slide you had up that the contribution is in percent towards the mitigations risk reduction. So is this percent of just this one mitigation, or is this percent of all the mitigations?
Yeah, it's percent of all, right? It's percent of all by risk mitigation year and tranche, I believe, because that's the four columns that we're joining on, right? So it's a percent of all. Yeah.
So this camera might be, I don't know, 5% mitigation and risk reduction, and then some other mitigations. You would have a total of 100% for all the mitigations, or you would have a total of whatever percent it is, 80% or 50%, or and it would be a combination of O&M and capital projects. I mean, I'm just kind of trying to get a bigger picture of how you're.
I think those will be different mitigations, right? Hopefully they're different mitigations. And then number one. Number two, basically, as far as, percent of whether they'll roll up to 100%, I think for a lot of these mitigations, especially way out in the future, we will fill in what we know, and then the rest we'll probably have to put like a placeholder, placeholder RRU to account for the 100%, right? So maybe the cameras in this particular case, 5%, maybe the 5 cameras, 25%, but the other 75%, we don't have a good idea how those projects are structured yet. So for example, we would maybe put in a placeholder RRU with 75% of for the estimated contribution. And then as the details are available, we can break up that placeholder to account for the identity of the projects.
So is this related to the mitigation effectiveness?
No, so this is basically related to risk results, right? So it looks at not directly, because if you're talking about the effectiveness in terms of like how much risk percent reduces, yes, it's indirectly related, but this basically is looking at the risk results, how much risk get reduced from each of these RRUs. And other results like, the change in the core, change in the law, and things like that. Now, like whether we can represent all these things as percentages, something to think about. Like I said, we haven't done any of this before. So I think that, there's going to be, we would suggest that you do have some kind of trial stage to see whether all this stuff works, just like we did with the transparency proposal.
I mean, could I ask one follow-up first?
Yes, sure. Sorry.
Yeah, so I just wanted to clarify, because I think Wendy's question is really essential. Is the RRU estimated contribution, that percentage, does it roll up to 100% at the mitigation program, or is it is it 100% at this particular hydropower dam?
So once again, it would be 100% of the year mitigation, tranche, and risk, right? So
Oh, I
remember,
see. Okay. That's helpful, thanks. Yeah, I just wanted to see if, because so in your slide deck where you were like describing the description for ROU estimated contribution, it says the contribution and percentage of this ROU towards the mitigations risk reduction. It sounds like it's the entire program rather than the mitigation program at this dam at that year, etc. You might just want to.
yeah,
Oh, sorry.
clarify that. Yeah, sure. Yeah.
Yeah, that'd be helpful. Go ahead, Ami.
So it's related to previous question and what Eddie just said, that if you are using the first four basically column as a primary key, maybe you want to add a location to that, because just these four are not unique. I mean, I know that Yumi changed the F to the location, but risk, tranche, year, mitigation, and maybe some location element like circuit segment or something can make it unique for RU, and I think it clarifies that contribution as well. Does it make sense?
Well, I mean, I think location is project specific, right? So I think it's not a key, but if to the extent that it's available, it could be another column in this ROU supplemental information table.
I guess, correct me if I'm wrong, but maybe an example would be 100 high-risk employees, like employees doing something. If this was an employee safety risk, that might be an RRU if it's going out to 10,000 employees, but it wouldn't have a location associated with it because it'd be
location.
100 of the 10,000 employees, and then the next year we'll do 200 with that 100 pilot. Whereas, Belden Dam, yes, we could pin a location very easily on Belden Dam, and that would make sense.
Yeah, so I mean, if we're talking about, I don't know, in terms of this, maybe we're working on 5 dams or whatever as a mitigation. That's how we decide to scope it. And then, so we won't have the location. Perhaps we might not even know the location. Perhaps a better example of this, right? Like we have this Belden Dam example here. We don't know the location of where each camera is going to be yet, right? And it's not really information from a mitigation program. We don't want to use that as a key at a mitigation level. But when you're describing each RRU, yeah, you could have a location to the extent that you know the location. So I feel like it's something that belongs in the RRU supplemental table, not the other risk results table and things like that.
Can I clarify that? So for some risk like wildfire or gas, we need location, but for some system, while as you mentioned, one of them, or security, we don't have location. Can you say that?
No, I understand what you're saying. I just feel like, when we're talking about, we're making a distinction here between mitigation level and RRU level, right? So location, we believe, is an RRU level kind of attribute. It's part of the RRU, so it should stay in the RRU tables. Whereas mitigation level, that's a higher level, consists of many locations, right, for mitigation. And so that's why that column shouldn't be in the risk results table. It should be in the RRU table. We're not saying we don't have location. We just want to put it in the right place.
So maybe an example of this would be like a system-wide SCADA upgrade. So, SCADA, for those unfamiliar, it's an instrument and control system that spans our entire waterway systems as well as our entire gas systems and many other places. And so as we reach out through a GRC, we plan to implement this, and RRU may be able to tackle that on test year or year after. We know we're going to go for these because they're either easier to handle or they're higher risk, something like that, depending on low-hanging fruit attributes, that kind of idea. But for the remaining 70-80%, because this is going to be hundreds, if not thousands of miles of SCADA upgrades, we may have to figure out how to RRU placeholder, give general location, or something to the effect that says, we aren't committing to do it this way, and we don't want to feed you false information that makes it look like we're doing it this way.
Yeah, thank you. Yep.
And maybe as a kind of a supplement to the location, or maybe it could work in tandem, would be like a list of assets that are associated with the RRU, like which assets are is the RRU actually mitigating? you know, if you have that information, that could actually help you with kind of the location issue, because it would be unique for this RRU. You know that it's going to be reducing, you know, risk on this particular circuit segment, so you could actually list out that circuit segment in connection with the RRU supplemental table. I can see how it makes sense to put it in this table.
Yeah, I think once again, right, we're start with the draft, right? You know, it's like we need to play around with this. Like you mentioned, there could be more columns in this table that
Right.
makes sense. You know, I think we originally had an additional information comments column, you know, catch all, you know, as we work through this stuff, you know, and we want more structure to this table, we can add in more columns. But right now, it just had a catch-all comments field. There's also RU units as well that could also help identify some of that.
Yeah, and one of the reasons that I bring up the kind of like an asset column, I was actually kind of curious if your team had actually reached out to PG&E's SB 884 team that's working on, like, you know, kind of understanding data templates in that context. You know, the OEIS guidelines are pretty detailed in terms of what type of information is needed in order to file an expedited undergrounding plan. And so, you know, that I would imagine that you guys would want a certain amount of alignment with how they're going to need to develop their templates to submit to that EUP requirements in OAIS.
I mean, that's one thing too. But the other thing is you know, we're the enterprise risk team, right? So we have to look beyond the wildfire kind of approach, right? You know, not all of our lines of business, our functional areas have that same amount of detail.
Sure.
Not all of those fields are relevant, right? So it's like, you know, I think this approach, you know, and perhaps we start with this RRU supplemental table, maybe for wildfire. We can have another RRU table because we have the keys, right? So we can join across tables. So maybe for wildfire, we have additional tables that will describe that information. But for others, you know, maybe we stick with this. Once again, you know, it's something we should try out.
Yeah, that's interesting. I mean, I appreciate the idea of you know, using keys to design all, you know, supplemental tables for risks that need to be more granular, and I think we'll probably have a conversation about that as well when SPD presents on Thursday. Let's see. I just wanted to open it up. I do have a couple of other questions, but does anybody else have any follow-ups or thoughts before I dive in? Yeah, go ahead, Chris.
Yeah, so since we're on this slide, I'm just looking to get a better understanding of how these two different tabs or two different tables work together. This is an example, I guess, where it's installing cameras. If we were looking at this for undergrounding, would each of these rows, these would each be different RRUs? Do I have that right, Vincent?
That's correct.
Okay, and so each RRU or project might be in a different location. It might be reducing risk to a different extent than in our other RRUs. So we might see a listing of different locations and RRUs. I think we were talking about adding a column that would be able to capture the location of this project. And then, so we see like there could be an RRU that might show up in 2 years. You know, it might be 2028, another one in 2028, but it's the same RRU because it's kind of crossing across 2 different years. Do I understand that?
Yeah.
Okay.
Sure. Yeah.
Okay. And then, so this captures the supplemental data. If we were to flip back to the risk results data for a moment, the tab, yeah. So similarly, we would see a different line here. Just make sure I'm just trying to see if I understand it correctly. A different line for each of these RRUs. It would show the years. It would show the risk result, the values so we'd see it on on both tabs. Do I understand it correctly?
No, so this particular tab's at the mitigation level, right? So
Okay.
the scores are at the mitigation level, but the idea is that with the percentages that you see in the RRU supplemental tab, you can figure out, for example, you mean if you can go back to the RRUs.
Yeah, this percentage.
This percentage here, let's say it's, you would take that 100% and you multiply the value that from the risk results table that has the same risk tranche year and risk and mitigation, I believe. So that's the idea. It's for example, you see that line row 2, the value of let's look at risk reduction. Let's look at not row 2.
This one.
Yeah, that's a rather small number, 0.000469, right? So it's like, that risk reduction obviously is going to come from some combination of RRUs. And that percentage field that you saw in the RRU supplemental tab there, that represents the percentage of the risk reduction attributed to that RRU. This is at the mitigation level, program level, and then the RRU will help you bring it down one level to the RRU level.
So if we jump back over to the supplemental tab again for a moment, it seems like, would there be any reason not to include like the risk reduction, that information in these columns? Because it seems to me like that will then be able to help us quickly, doing a sort or what have you, be able to understand which RRUs are achieving the greatest risk, which ones have the greatest unmitigated risk, and that sort of thing. So that could be duplicated in these columns. Is that fair to say?
I mean, I think we were trying, when we did this, we were going with a very flexible approach, right? Which is basically, the reason I talk about all these joins is basically, we intended to have these tables join across each other so you can create basically a larger table and you would be able to do the calculations you wanted to. So instead of just reporting the numbers in these columns, and remember there's a ton of numbers, right? Because, for example, if you go to the risk results table, look at all the results types that we have, and for example, we have to do 3 times that for the 3 different interest rate scenarios. It's going to be, I think already this file for hydro was over 1 million rows. Is that right? Yeah, I can't remember. It's like a gig or something, right? So you're talking about 3 gigs, and then you're multiplying by a number of REs. It just gets a bit too much. So basically, it's kind of like a database approach here. We put the information in different tables. You can join and do the kind of queries that you want to do. But yeah, you should be able to be able to get those calculations.
Okay, yeah, because I think having it on the other tab, being able to quickly, having it, since it'll be tabular, and that way we can look at, quickly doing a sort, we can see what are the greatest risk reductions, what are the greatest risks, and then having an idea where the locations are. I think that would all be helpful for us to readily, kind of do our own sorts on it at the RRU level. So, okay, I think I have it better.
I think I want to just mention something about that. Yeah, it'll be tabular, but I can't guarantee you that it'll fit in Excel, right? I can't guarantee you will be less than 1 million rows. So I feel like, if we want the granularity that everyone is desiring, at some point in time, we'll have to be comfortable with these tools, pivot tables, SQL, whatever, because there's a lot of data that we're talking about.
Got it. And it also could be, I mean, if it did get to be a very, very large file, I imagine it could be separate files for separate mitigations as well.
You can't put it together. In fact, Excel is kind of dangerous. Sometimes you read the file and it only shows you the first 1 million rows, right? There's more, it just doesn't show it to you. So it's like, it's kind of dangerous to do things that way.
Okay, but I mean, the mitigations could be broken up to some degree and in different files.
You could do that, and then you're just going to have a lot of kind of processing, putting stuff back together. I've done it before, gone that way. Usually I neglect something, I miss something because there are a whole lot of things you need to put back together. So I mean, I just want to caution everyone that, you know, with all this data, you know, we need to get efficient in how we want to use it, right? We need to have the tools to use it.
So I think earlier you were looking at a breakdown of one of these cells and looking at the number of different, you know, what's one of the drop-down menus? Was it the result type?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Core before, core after, lower after. Okay, that I think all of those different attributes would be very valuable to keep. I'm just curious, perhaps if it did get to be where it wasn't easily manipulated, then maybe there would be a way to select the key things that the commission or parties would be most interested in, and perhaps leaving those out of a more focused subset, you know, so that the key information could be captured in a reasonable size file, and then some of the other stuff could be excluded, you know, just to be able to facilitate that analysis. But I hear what you're saying. Thanks.
Wendy, please go ahead.
Yeah, I'm a little concerned about losing the granularity of the multi-attributes, the safety, reliability, and the financial, because especially with the recent changes, you know, reliability is now becoming a much bigger component, at least for some of the risk. Yeah, so you're saying it is there. How do you see it? I'm not seeing it. Can you show us?
Yeah.
Where's reliability?
Not in this example.
This particular risk does not have reliability.
Yes.
Okay.
Do you want to see an example with reliability?
Yeah, because I want to see, can we track them separately then? I mean, I guess
Yeah. Let me switch to another example. This was basically a table that we included in our transparency proposal, so this should be available to you all. So this one is particularly large OP risk. It includes all of the data in the risk results table. So I filtered for the baseline for now. And Wendy, you can see that there are different attributes available in here. So let me filter so that this can be more manageable to see, because there are a lot of rows. So let's say you just want to see total risk before. Yes, total risk before for all attributes, and then not particular one trench, but all aggregated trenches overall. Then you can see the total risk value 23 million, and then like different attribute risk scores by financial, gas reliability, and safety. Right? If you want to see a particular trench risk score, you can filter for that. Then you see those attribute level risk scores. If you wanted to look at, so let's see, not the baseline, but mitigation risk reduction, then you could filter for a particular mitigation. Let me just, let's say one mitigation, and then let's choose a particular trench and for a particular year. And these are different attributes And then let's just filter for risk reduction only. Then you can see that 4 different values for the risk reduction by a different attribute and aggregated as well. So the data is there, and because it's tabular format, you can filter them and be able to see results rather than having like many columns with different year and different mitigation and different scenario.
And you could create a multi-year layout if you wanted to using pivot tables, analyzing this table.
Yeah.
Okay,
With-
I appreciate that. I didn't see that. I didn't really see. I guess my when you're talking about the RRUs, it's just got them the risk all together, you know, combined, right?
Yeah, and I think the reason that we put as RRU supplemental table rather than expanding this risk result table with RRU column is even at this level of granularity of mitigation trench year level, it is unmanageable to see with Excel. I mean, I put this file large OP risk because this one is small enough granularity that you can see all of the rows in Excel, but then large uncontrolled water list, loss of containment on transmission risk, those are not visible, or like number of rows are more than 1 million, so you cannot see it here. So if you expand this table with RRU, theoretically, you can do all the calculations, but number of rows will not be able to be manageable. And so what is the key information that we could, we would like to see at the RRU level? And the key information is % contribution to the mitigation and trend level for that RRU. So if we separate them out, then maybe it's more clear to see the contribution of the RRU on the risk reduction.
Maybe I'll add something here because Yumi and I have kind of worked with this data earlier at the end of last year quite a bit. Because what Yumi is showing us is actually the results of their transparency pilot. And initially, when as Yumi mentioned, when the data was submitted to the service list, there were a number of files that were not able to be opened in Excel. And what Yumi did, and I think kudos to the folks at PG&E for doing this. They basically shared all of the data in a single file. It was in a CSV file, which they also provided instructions about how you can use pivot tables so that you could actually see all of at least the results of the data through a pivot table in Excel. And that's all available actually through PG&E's submitted transparency pilot. And so actually everything that Yumi is showing us here it's already available. It's not something that's actually new. But the new piece that's added into it is the RRU supplemental table. And so I think I do hear, though, some of the concerns from folks on this call that there is an interest in seeing, the RRU results of this in a more tabular format. And I think, for the transparency pilot, it was an interesting approach to use, column H, that results type, as a filter for trying to understand where your variables are the results of your analysis have a low quality or a high quality. It makes sense, but in order to do data analysis, transforming this into a data set that somebody could use to understand what are the different options for reducing risk on the system. That's a big ask, actually, because you would have to essentially transform, because the results type, that column H, while this data set that's on the screen right now, it is in tabular format. That results type H, that is not a tabular variable. You have to sort and select the variable on your own. And if you wanted to look at trends of risk reduction along with a trend of, say, like core before or core after, you would have to do quite a bit of data manipulation in order to get that information, especially at the RRU level, where the variables would be side by side in a tabular format, so that you could do something like a regression analysis, or if you wanted to do any type of mean testing, it would be a pretty big task to put that together. So my question is, just kind of expanding out. I understand that this would create large data sets, possibly CSV files. Is that data well, a couple questions. One, is it really necessary that the data sets have to be this large? Is it not possible to compress the data? I mean, a lot of it is
So perhaps I can take a stab at answering this question. Eddie, it's like, so when we design these tables, right? You look at them. I mean, these are, I guess, they were built when we designed them. They were kind of designed for the fully relational tables. The information here is what's called normalized data, right? So basically, you can write to do the regression analysis or whatever you want to do. You could pretty easily write an SQL join, SQL join to do that. Select from whatever this table name is, where result type equals risk reduction or something like that. Boom, you have that stuff, right? So if you wanna do this is really kind of structured for database queries, right? If you want to what they call denormalize the data, that's doable, but it's like, let's try to figure out how we want to use this data first before we do all this kind of optimizations, right? So it's like, I mean, I think I haven't written an SQL query in 20 years, but I'm pretty sure if you throw this into Access or whatever it is, I could pretty much write one in 15 minutes to get the data that you want, right?
Right. But Vincent, the key though would be that there has to be an SQL server that stores this data. And so is PG&E thinking of hosting something like that?
No,
or
Microsoft Access has SQL in it. Do they still make Access? I think they do,
Yeah,
right? Yeah.
So where would the data be stored then?
You would download the CSV into Access, for example.
Okay.
That's one way you could do that. And then you could do your, Access has a little graphics, the things you can draw, the little arrows, and that's a suggestion. But like I mentioned, yeah, we can instead of having a result type with all the different stuff, you can put in row wise, you can change it to column wise. You can definitely do that, but let's figure out how we want to use the data first. I think that's key, because certain things, this format is pretty flexible. You can do a lot with it. If you transform it, you denormalize it, it's less flexible. So before we do that, let's try to understand, kind of the use.
I don't actually disagree with you. I think that, like, in an ideal world, like, using SQL queries and whatnot to try and run our analyses would be really great. I'm not certain that everyone has that skill and that capability.
Understood.
And I think that's one of the reasons why you and I worked quite a bit, actually, to try and put that pivot table approach together. I think it's all Excel based, and Yumi did a really good job of trying to provide instructions about how you could view the data through pivot tables using CSV files. So, I mean, I guess this approach is interesting and unique, and it just may require a lot more, a similar type of effort, where you have to, like, provide instructions describing to people how they would need to manipulate the data in order to get it in the format that they are more comfortable with. If that's If you guys catch
Yeah.
my meaning, yeah.
Yeah. Totally understand. It's like, back to the point I was making at first. We have a lot of data, and so it's like there are two ways about it. Either we everyone gets comfortable with the tools. It might not be realistic, or then the other way is basically to find out which queries which canned queries are most important to counterparties, and then we can. I keep saying counterparties. I don't mean parties, and then we can write canned SQL queries or whatever that create this stuff for you. So
Okay. I do have one though concern about the results type, because so far, and this is just it's just the result of this being related to the transparency pilot, but there's no result type related to present value, any present value calculations or CBR. And so you were mentioning like the different scenarios for discount rates. You know, maybe I don't know if you necessarily need the you were mentioning like you could have different scenarios for each RRU, but if you had a column for scenario and you had like a result type that was specific to a certain scenario, then you wouldn't necessarily need like a unique RRU for each scenario of the discount rate. You would just need the result type that's associated with that calculation. But at this point, I don't think that's built into this, the model that you've presented.
So if you go back to let's see if I can
Take over the screen real quick.
Why doesn't it take over the screen?
And maybe after we talk through this, we'll take a quick break and then come back.
Okay, if we go to the previous slide. Yeah, so this results table, right? For example, you can see these results types, and I believe it's actually according to transparency proposal says additional results types can be added as necessary. Was designed that way?
Okay.
So you can add in risk before dash scenario one, or what interest rate scenario one, risk before low before dash scenario one, or whatever. So you can take these results and you create 3 sets of them, one for each different interest rate scenario, for example. Not sure that's what we want to do, but just that's one way of solving that problem.
But I guess my follow-up question though is like taking the approach that you have with like using the RRU estimated contribution. How are you going to use that percentage contribution to estimate something like present value benefit, present value cost, and the CBR? Have you guys kind of thought about that, or is it just a straight percentage? Does that work out mathematically?
Well, that's something that I thought about. Don't know yet. I mean, this is what we're putting the percentage out as a try, right? It's like we feel that's the way that I can't think of. Maybe I can, but like it would seem like percent's the way to go, but we need to try this. That's all I need to say.
Okay, all right. Thank you. I just wanted to raise that. Hey, how about we take a quick break? We're right at 11 o'clock, and we'll come back in 10 minutes. I still have a couple of questions for you guys that I wanted to ask, but I really appreciate all the questions today. And if folks have additional questions and thoughts, please raise your hand, and we'll get back to you right after the break. How about I'll share my screen and throw the break slide up for everybody. And yeah, we'll be back. We'll just be back at 11:10. All right, everybody. Bring us back. See if we can get a reaction for, yeah, there's the folks. PG&E, thanks for coming back. And I'll stop sharing and maybe I will I'm gonna ask like kind of an open question to the other two utilities actually. I'm just curious if there was a discussion at all, or not a discussion. I'm just curious how the other two utilities are thinking about the approach that PG&E has presented in terms of their own data management, and if they see this, because remember, this is the discussion is about creating a template, and in a way, PG&E has presented a template, but they've also presented a kind of like a data management approach. And so I just wanted to see if anybody on the other two utilities has any opinion or any thoughts that they wanted to share on this. I see a couple of folks from SCE, and I know Josh, you're on the line, but I just wanted to get a sense for how folks are thinking about this and if they had any opinions at this time.
Eddie, before maybe other utilities answer, to give them some time,
Sure.
can I answer the question around MPV
Oh,
that you
sure.
asked before?
Sure.
Yeah, so let me share the screen. So just to clarify this structure of risk results table, you see that there are 2 years in here. One, this is year of risk or risk reduction, and this is the program year. And so if you have a particular program mitigation for a particular trench, the program could be implemented, or the spend could happen in 2027, but then it could have risk reduction for multiple years. So for example, 2027 spend could have the risk reduction for these future years over the benefit life. And so the risk reduction value in here is capturing that. It's a risk reduction for that particular year in each year from the spend that's done in 2027. So these are not MPV values. These are uncounted values.
Right.
And so how we could accommodate the MPV calculations in here will be adding in the year column in here, rather than putting the numbers in, but put NPV. And then we would have risk reduction. Risk reduction value here will be NPV value, right?
Oh, I see.
Yeah, and then we could also have CBR result type added, and then this will be the CBR value.
And it would be based on the benefit calculation for it. But how do you have a cost for each year as well?
Yes. So
in the result type.
Cost, of course, it's going to be just 1 year cost, right?
Right. I had a question about that actually, so I'm glad that we brought this up, because even in your example with the hydropower, the cameras, your cost example there also only had one cost, but I was curious because at least in the hydropower projects that the projects that were related to the hydropower example in your most recent ramp, I noticed that there was quite a few that actually span multiple years. So I was curious, why is there a single cost value here?
The reason is that it was when we were inputting the cost, we actually inputted cost for each year, like capital dollars for each year, as well as expense dollars for each year, right? So the input values are available at that level of granularity, but then in the end, we had to do the MPV of the costs. And so just because we had to do the MPV, we pulled just a single cost, which is the MPV of the cost that incorporates the PVRR and then capital and all expenses.
Oh, and that's
What-
what this value is?
I believe so.
Well, what if you
Oh,
filter off of the program year? Well, that
I see. Yeah. So, because I mean, in some cases, it might actually even be, helpful to see all of that. Yeah, I see. Okay. Because in
Yeah.
some cases, it might actually be helpful to see the costs for each year over time that they're actually spent. The expenses as they're spent out for the. I mean, I understand that they're forecasts. That's the purpose of the ramp and everything, but. Even in the GRC context, I think there's going to be an interest in seeing like how the costs are going to be spent over the build out of the of the RRU. And this is at the mitigation level. This isn't even at the RRU level. This is at a very high level here.
This is mitigation. Yes. So for that one, I think that here we should have done MPV in here because these are actually MPV costs.
Right.
So this should be MPV instead of each individual year.
Right.
But in theory, right, the data is already available, and so we could have like CapEx in here.
Right.
And then the dollars will be capital expenditures for that year. And it could have different years if the cost is spread out for multiple years.
Okay. Yeah, just something for you guys to think about. And yeah, I think that the idea of adding in the MPV in that year column, I understand the logic there. It just means that you wouldn't have to add in a whole lot of, well, you wouldn't need an extra column, and you could just probably integrate the calculation in through your coding, I'm assuming.
Yeah, and probably the discount factor scenario could be incorporated in there in that year column as well, right? It's MPV with discount rate 1 or MPV with discount rate 2. So that could be also.
Yeah, the only part of that is that, and maybe this is a data template, and so maybe this isn't that big of a deal, but it would be interesting to know what the formula is for calculating NPV, and really it's just PV, it's not net, it's just present value. But anyway, it would be interesting to know what the formula is for calculating that. But maybe that's something that could just be discussed within your ramp narrative. Doesn't necessarily need to be in the data template explicitly. Yeah, I mean.
Are you done with the MPV? My question is related to the data template. So actually it's for Vincent or Yumi. So you mentioned that, I really appreciate that actually for clarifying that. You mentioned that you are using data template, it's SQL based. I think it's kind of like obvious from the format. My question is it a PG&E customized version, or it's based on one of those Oracle's template for utilities like PeopleSoft or those kind of things? The reason I'm asking is that other utilities are using the same template, or it's just something that you guys customize for yourself?
So to be clear, right, the outputs are CSV files, and the CSV files you should be able to suck those into a database if you want to. You can use Excel, but you won't be able to see all the rows, right? I mean, you can still do pivot tables with Excel, but as I'm sure Eddie's aware, you won't be able to see past the first million rows. So whatever tools you want to use, underlying is built on CSV files, and the intent is that data should be database friendly. Be it if you want to use Excel.
I meant sorry to interrupt you. I meant the original data that you mentioned that you have, the original data that you have, and you're building these pivot tables.
So are you asking how we got this data?
Yeah, you mentioned that you have data set and you're writing some SQL to basically generate some queries that you're generating these pivot table or show.
We're saying basically, since we have all these things in table format, we can write SQL queries if we decide to go that route. Don't have to. So that's what we were seeing.
So your data is not in SQL server?
So to be clear, right, the information here is generated from all the input worksheets in our ramp, all the Excel files that we've provided in the work papers in the ramp. And then we had Yumi's team come and program it, take those inputs, those data from those spreadsheets, and turn them into this tabular CSV format. So no, we don't store that information right now in databases.
So the original, so basically what, sorry, I'm repeating myself, but so the data, I know the final data is in Excel or these tabular format, but you don't generate these tables from some data in SQL server.
Correct.
No, we are not generating it.
Okay.
So these were all generated using Python code. And the Python code reads input from Excel, the work papers that we submitted in the ramp. Right, it's all like aggregated, manipulated or calculated, and put into this format of the data using Python.
Okay, thank you. It's helpful. Thanks.
Okay, great. I mean, maybe the quick clarification. There's a lot of data inputs into ramp work papers. All of this, I understand this is all scraped essentially from ramp work papers, but all of the inputs into those work papers are coming from various databases, or is there a single database that you're using to generate your ramp work papers?
Various sources. I wouldn't even call them databases.
Correct. Yeah. I'll say having been on that side, it's you do really have to search through everything from engineering manuals to project planning software to put it into something that says, okay, this is what it looks like for the work paper. So the best original source really is that work paper because it's done all of that scraping by the risk manager to get to a place where it can be calculated.
And then I guess the reason I asked that is that, Yumi, would that mean that each time that you wanted to create a data template, such as what you guys are presenting here, would that require you to kind of redo your code every year? Or if there's any changes to the modeling and what have you, does that mean that you would have to kind of redo quite a bit of the code for generating this particular data set?
Yeah, it's really effort intensive to update. So we may not need to redo the coding because coding is already done to generate these transparency pilot tables or the usual outputs that you see in the ramp work papers. However, let's say we would update the data on the risk model inputs or program inputs, dollars, or like the scope of work, those things. Those needs to be updated. That's significant amount of manpower because each SMEs needs to provide that input, and then it needs to like scrap the data from like hundreds of sources and then update the template. But then like running the model is using the existing code.
But if we want to make changes, like we want to add in this NPV thing that we were talking about, then you have to change the code to do that, right? You mean?
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. That's helpful. Again, I kind of want to just get. Oh, Chris, you're more welcome to speak, but I also was hoping to hear from some of the other utilities about this approach because I think it's significantly different than the approaches that they've presented, and so I just want to know: is this approach manageable considering the data structure and data management that they currently use? a response, I guess, is a response. But I'll give you guys time if you want to raise your hand. Just let us know if you want to answer that.
This is Gary from SCE.
Okay, thanks.
wanted
Gary.
more clarification on why you think this is so significantly different from SCEs.
I just want to make sure that what my question is that the data approach that you've presented, would you be able to format your data in this type of a structure, especially with that results type style of that's in column H, and yeah, that I have not seen in your data template, Gary. And so if you think that you're comfortable with that approach, then I don't know. I guess that's good information for the commission to know.
I guess I'm not truly understanding. What is this column H? What's so special about column H?
It includes many of the variables that you list as tabular are included within column H. So things like risk before, lore before, core before, risk after. You have that listed out in a tabular format. This is listed out in a, it's listed in one variable, and you would have to, use filters in order to see that information, or you would have to use what Vincent is describing. You would have to use some type of an SQL query function in order to generate it into a tabular format.
I think it's just two different point of views, right? I think if you all have all these as columns, one could argue that it's much simpler to interpret or see things, right? If you have it as this approach, you're going to have a lot more rows, and you're going to 5 times, 10 times more rows, right? Which may exceed 1 million rows. So I think it's just different. I think it's good to have different perspectives and different viewpoints of how to look at different data sets, right? I don't think there's one perfect way to do anything.
Right, but I just want to make it clear that the point of a data template. I mean, I'm sure all of you have worked or at least paid quite a bit of attention to the data templates that are found within the WMP. Those approaches are meant to be used for all of the utilities, and so we just want to make sure that all of the utilities are at least understanding and clear about each of these two different approaches, and that it's possible to integrate this approach. And it sounds like you don't have that concern.
I'm not going to say yes or no. I'm just going to observe and take in all this information, and then we'll produce our final template.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Thanks. I appreciate that, Gary.
Hey, Eddie. This is Josh with SoCal Gas and SDG.
Yep.
I just want to let you know we're still discussing this internally. We're still, as Gary said, we're still taking this in on whether we can actually present something in the same fashion. So thank you.
Okay, great. Yeah, that's helpful. And I'll let Chris jump in.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, so I appreciate learning more about how this data is stored and how it's presented. It seems like there's some advantages or some usefulness that comes out of a consolidated template, and also some advantages to having the transparency and the detail that is a source of the template. And that way, if we had access to the source of it and instructions and ways to do it, I think we could have the ability to, produce our own analyses. One thing though, and I understand this comes from, the transparency of the last phase, but what I'm not hearing actually is how this information is used to drive selection of risk mitigation programs, to be able to pick, the ones that have the best benefits, the ones that should be prioritized, the ones that should be done in the first year, the second year of a GRC, because I believe that is one of the objectives and the intents of the ramp. And also I think these templates. So I think the templates can serve a couple of different purposes. One is to be able to, demonstrate insight, transparency, and accountability in risk mitigation programs. But I believe that the other side of this is that to understand how a utility is taking this information and then driving it, using it to select the risk mitigation programs that are going to produce the best benefit for ratepayers given the cost. And I'm not hearing that. It's more like this is data that's being gathered to be able to comply with the requirements that the commission might be developing for reporting of information. But it would be, I think, an intent of this is for the utility to use this, not just to gather it from different portions of its business, but to be able to use this information and then use that for its planning to prioritize what it's going to do. And I'm just, it's an observation. I might have it wrong, but it's not clear to me exactly what the process is, what the framework is that utilities may have to take this information and then perhaps say, okay, we're going to deprioritize this mitigation program because this other mitigation program is appropriately needs to be prioritized. So it's just an observation from what I think I'm hearing, if I understand it correctly.
Well, I just want to mention, right, like risk management, this kind of analysis is an evolving journey, right? So what we're trying to do here basically is get some insight into the numbers, get more details into the numbers and see how we can use them in terms of our decision making. Like I think one thing that's been useful that we've been pointing out and we put a lot of work into, you can see in this particular spreadsheet, there's a column there called EQ score, right? That gives us that number. I don't want to get into details about that because you can read all about that in our transparency proposal. We wrote it up. There's a PDF, there's 5 pages of that you can read. But basically, that score is something that, is useful to us because it shows you, how good of a quality these numbers are, right? So that's a guide, for example, to like what we should be focusing on in terms of the numbers that we have beforehand. I'm sure all decision makers want to know, what confidence do they have in these numbers. So like I mentioned, risk management, risk analysis, evolving journey. We're building this as we go along. This is this cost benefit approach, this transparency, still in its infancy. So yeah, that's all I want to say about that.
Well, maybe I could jump in with a question. It kind of tags onto this, which is that I don't believe that alternative mitigations is actually listed in the transparency pilot. The focus was only on the primary, or the proposed mitigation, and so would the option here be to add in somewhere within like either the mitigation column or the program type, would you be adding alternative into this data set, so that way someone who was interested in looking at like the decision making process could do comparisons between the proposed and the alternative mitigation.
Yeah, I think that could be one way we handle that.
Yeah. Oh, Wendy, yeah, please.
Yeah, I think Chris's question got me thinking a little bit, stepping to a higher level, and a couple of things. One, we had discussed in the past about portfolios of mitigations, and I don't really know where we are at with that, but I do believe it would be very helpful for us to be able to put together portfolios, or have, the utilities show us a portfolio and how do those, portfolios all work together, and then for us to have for others to be able, stakeholders, to do their own analysis on different portfolios. So are you, Yumi, are you like doing some
I mean,
something to show?
I think, like you said, right, we're also a little bit like not sure where we stand with portfolios, but as the requirements work out, as you know, whatever we work our way forward on that issue, I think this kind of approach is flexible enough.
Yeah, I just want to clarify that, you know, the risk tolerance workshop number 2 for phase 4 had an extensive discussion about portfolios, and so it is an important topic, and I would be interested to know, you know, is it possible to integrate a portfolio approach using this approach to data management?
Yeah, as an example here, right? This is already what we compute. In here, mitigation, this is all is the portfolio of the proposed mitigations and control, right? And so after all mitigations, and the list of mitigations were, as you've seen before, like all of this below. And the result type risk after, this will show post-mitigation risk scores after a portfolio of mitigations for each year, right? So you would be able to compare portfolio level risk, post-mitigation risk. And then if you were to compare that with the pre-mitigation score, then there is a baseline in here. And this is the, you would choose the risk before so that you can see before and after risk.
I think it's just to go into the kind of portfolio idea, if I'm hearing it right, there is potential then for this to do groups of mitigations that we would call different portfolios that we could then, like,
Yeah.
we have not done that at this stage with this analysis, but it would absolutely be able to fit within once we actually apply some sort of portfolio approach.
Yes, I mean, as long as we choose, okay, which mitigations we would include in each alternative
Yes.
portfolio, the same calculations can be done, and then we can put portfolio 1 and 2 in the mitigation column in here. We have done that in the 2020 ramp when we did alternative analysis. We have done the portfolio approach at the time, but we didn't find it very useful. And so we didn't do that way in the recent ramp. In the recent ramp, we proposed alternative mitigations or alternative scope of mitigations, things like that, rather than doing the portfolio analysis, including that alternative mitigations. And the reason is that we didn't think that the portfolio level analysis is yet useful or accurate enough because it assumes how mitigations interact each other,
Yeah.
and that's not good enough yet in order to utilize for the decision making, in our opinion. So. But theoretically, like once we establish all of the necessary information, that's good enough for decision making. The calculations can happen just like this.
Sorry, can I just clarify one thing? You said that, you know, the interactions between mitigations weren't good enough for alternatives, but why would it be good enough for the primary proposed mitigation?
Well, I mean, the question is whether you would compare alternative portfolios,
right,
with the proposed portfolio, right? I don't think that we are at that level of decision making, right? We might want to just go with, okay, should we go with this mitigation or this mitigation, or should we go with this alternative approach of this particular mitigation? Maybe that's better, but like doing the portfolio level comparison, I don't think that that's ready. Yeah.
I mean,
I guess, like,
go ahead, Elijah.
I was just gonna say, like, if I'm understanding, and correct me if not, basically try and compare, okay, this mitigation path with the overall, that is a straightforward, and we can answer that question. But when we start creating circles, particularly in the ramp, which is not obviously what the GRC is going to land on, you just end up with so many circles of overlapping potential portfolios trying to guess at what it needs to be compared to, that it ends up extremely flimsy. So with the current method, we just have mitigation compared to all, not portfolio one compared to portfolio two, and each of these are now compared to all, but what if portfolio one and portfolio three go forward without portfolio two? How do we compare that to? So you see how it kind of builds into, it's hard to make all of those concentric or overlapping circles make a valid comparison that actually factors in what is then going to happen in the next 2 to 3 years of the GRC rate case. So that's why it makes it much easier for us to consider mitigation versus this rather than overlapping.
I mean, the OAIS guidelines do actually require that, you know, alternative portfolio comparisons are going to be necessary at project level for the SB 884 program. And so I'm assuming you guys have started to have that conversation with the, you know, the team that's working on that. And, you know, is that not something that's going to have an impact on ramp as well? And yeah, I mean, yeah, I'm not sure.
You know, I'm kind of, correct me if I'm wrong, Amy and Elijah, but like I kind of think that, you know, you can do it on maybe a case by case basis. You know, looking at undergrounding versus overhead. You know, you can do that limited extent, but on a more general basis, put it into some you know program to solve. You know, like I don't think. You know, like with finance, it's easy, right? You have this whatever covariance matrix. You do some multiplication, you all set. You can do all that stuff till the cows come home. But here, it's not that kind of problem. So you know, these interacting effects are not captured that way. So you know, like I said, maybe you can do one-off undergrounding versus overhead, but on a general basis, I don't know if we're there yet.
It can't just be overhead, though. I mean, the requirements are a little bit more complicated than that.
Right. I understand. I'm just saying that, you know, if you limit the problem down to a specific problem, in this particular case, SB 884, you'll be able to dedicate more effort and look at that problem a little bit more closer. But at a general level, I don't know whether we can do it.
I guess I would kind of analyze it to nuclear industry probabilistic risk assessments, PRAs, are very, I'm going to say easy because that's where I come from, because it kind of goes back to your undergrad engineering where you're saying my heat transfer outside of this box of this problem, everything is perfect insulation. I have nothing anywhere else that can go. Kind of same thing with the wildfire example for the SB 884. They are able to much easier construct a box and just like nuclear, load all of the information into that box, and that box is isolated. But then the moment you transfer to, okay, here's my real world non-box example, I've got multiple overlapping risks, I've got competing budget priorities, I've got safety, reliability, and financial to consider, in addition to things that are not going into this, which is like scoping, permitting, environmental considerations. You end up with a much more complex problem that the ramp is doing its best to analyze, because that makes for a more valid presentation going into the GRC than just the, here's my nice heat transfer box with perfect insulation on the outside. Or here's my nuclear power plant where a core damage represents everybody dying outside of the range, because that's actually where core damage came from. They couldn't calculate whether or not people would die. So they just said, if the core is damaged, people die. And that was how they abbreviated that problem to make it a containable problem. And in ramp, we can't use that kind of approach.
I mean, I don't want to put you guys on the spot. I know you're not part of the SB 8814, but that's not my understanding of how they're looking at the issue. But at any rate, this has at least been helpful in trying to understand like where you guys are coming from in terms of portfolios, and I think you know, it's an open discussion in the proceeding, and so as it evolves, it will require probably the template to evolve as well. And so, you know, as that topic progresses, I think just good to keep in mind approaches for thinking about how to present this data and how it might be useful to different analysts
Yeah,
and
and
different
especially that
stakeholders.
we're still in infancy with this, so.
Wendy, go ahead.
Yeah, I had another question. For mitigation effectiveness, would we be able to input a different value and run the numbers?
Well, so mitigation effectiveness is handled a little differently, but nevertheless handled in the transparency proposal, right? So if you remember Elijah's first slide, showed the transparency proposal. It had 3 tables in there. And one of the tables was called the sensitivity table. And basically that would give you the change in risk score associated with small changes or large changes. It's actually small changes. The large change part we have some difficulty doing, but that's what the sensitivity is supposed to tell you. If you change your parameter, your effectiveness percentage, you change it a little bit, how would that impact the risk score? So it's a first, perhaps second order kind of approximation, but gives you a guide as to where you should be focusing on, which parameters are important to the analysis.
Yeah, so let me, this one has particularly 0 effectiveness, but yeah, the other table, sensitivity and scenario analysis table that Vince is mentioning, has the effectiveness value in it. Maybe I should choose a different year. It will show what the CBR is based on the value of the effectiveness.
Moving up and down 10%, right?
Yeah, and then we didn't do the sensitivity analysis for probably that one, but here there is a small. It should be linear to it, right? So if you increase effectiveness by 10%, you would have like CBR 10% higher.
Yeah, Chris, do you want to follow up on that?
Yeah, actually, what I was going to refer to is the prior to Wendy's question, the topic about SB 884. I don't.
Wait, could I ask one quick thing about this first, Chris? Actually, I was curious about this, Yumi. Like, there were quite a few examples that didn't run a sensitivity analysis, and I was just curious as to why that was. Is it something that's unique to the particular mitigation, or it? Yeah, I was wondering why the perturbations weren't included.
Yeah, so when we were doing this, we realized that sensitivity analysis is not trivial task. And so all of this calculation was done manually, row by row. And so employee safety one, it was, we were able to finish up the manual calculation by putting some logic in. So I think that those are available in here, but probably loss of containment, we couldn't do the sensitivity because in order to come up with the sensitivity, we need to understand, okay, what are the ranges of the values for effectiveness and scope and cost. It was harder to come up with those individual values because it takes time and effort. So what we did was for employee safety risk where we could easily handle those compared to the other programs or risk. It was just time and efforts and resource need. Yeah.
But I do want to just make sure that it's clear to Wendy that like this approach does not allow you to specify a specific effectiveness number and then have it spit out the results after that. This approach would provide a range based on the requirements within the transparency pilot, and it would give you the results based on that sensitivity analysis on the mitigation effectiveness. So trying to come up with some type of a work paper that would allow for different testing of different effectiveness values, I think that's not what's being presented in this approach.
It's a first order approximation, right? It's it's like it's a first order approximation. You can get if the changes that you're thinking about, you're moving from 1% to 1.1%, then that first order approximation change in your cost benefit ratio is going to be pretty close. But if you're making like large changes, yeah, that might be a little bit off. Depends on whether the thing is a linear function or not.
But Eddie's statement was correct, yes.
And Wendy, did that help answer your question?
Yes, it did, but maybe you could also hear from my question what I think could be useful.
Wait, sorry, I didn't.
I'm just saying there's things, at a high level that I think still could be useful, particularly, when there's mitigations and there is a lot of contentiousness around the mitigation effectiveness that is used, and particularly when you see large variations between different utilities, and stuff. So I'm just putting it out there that it's something, we've seen repeatedly, as it's not clear that the mitigation effectiveness is always the right one that's used in the analysis or the best one.
And so having the ability to manipulate it could be beneficial to an analyst
or an engineer.
I mean, I'm not sure how Edison or Sempra use the mitigation effectiveness, so I would also caution on that, right? Like, just because we have this parameter 3%, they might build that black box differently from how we build our black box. So
I understand that, but I've still seen cases where, it has been contentious by parties, and it could be useful to be able to run the numbers differently for a different mitigation effectiveness.
Chris, did you want to ask your question?
Oh, sure, thanks. Yeah, this was prior to this last discussion, but it had to do when we were discussing, what's happening in, I believe it's SB 884, which I am not up to speed on entirely, but my understanding is that what's going to be required, or what is required for that, for the undergrounding programs, will be used to analyze and then justify plans that an operator may have for undergrounding. And it would make sense to me that I understand that this template is more of a broad overarching template, and this data is overarching across multiple different kinds of mitigation programs. It does still seem like it will have value, that whatever comes out of SB 884 could be captured as a minimum in this, even if it didn't apply to every type of mitigation program. That's because it will be useful to understand those kind of justifications, that analysis, and how a utility selects those programs and justifies them in GRCs, to the extent that some of those mitigations will remain in the ramp and the GRC, like overhead cover conductor, or, hardening of lines and that kind of stuff. So the extent that that sort of analysis can be used as a minimum in this, even if it isn't applied to all mitigations, it seems like it would be useful information to include as part of these templates and this data that's being collected.
Yeah, I guess I do want to clarify. I'm not saying that we would exclude any information we have available. The data collection that we do is for all risks is massive, and we do not try to exclude anything. Just wanted to say it as I was interpreting it from the other perspective of, let's do a SB 884 method for everything, which is, a much more focused, honed approach on a particular problem, not a rampant GRC broad. So I was not trying to say I would advocate excluding anything that comes from that, just not applying the exact same rules.
Sure. And I think there was a little bit of discussion earlier too about being able to compare the mitigation. So I don't believe that was in PG&E's last ramp where it was explicitly in their data that was presented in the application up front to be able to compare, for example, overhead with undergrounding, to be able, I believe there was a narrative that kind of touched upon the reason for picking undergrounding compared to cover conductor. But these templates, I think, would then, if this data is all captured in there, that would then have a structure so that everyone could have what would be the outcome of this templates effort to be able to compare the key and most relevant information when comparing mitigation. So I think that that kind of information would be useful as part of these templates. So.
Okay. Anybody from PG&E have any thoughts or?
No, we're just hearing this.
Okay,
Yep.
okay. Does anybody have any additional questions? I think my questions have, for the most part, been answered. I have one slight, it's like a technical question about the coding, but it's not about the coding, but it's just it's actually a technical question about the outputs. But if anybody had any other questions, you're more than welcome to ask them. Maybe Yumi, we're giving some folks some additional times to think. Could you pull up the I think it's easiest to use the example that you shared with the service list. And if we could see, actually, I think this will work, but could we see all of the results in the result type?
Yep.
Oh, actually, I don't think this was the one that was shared with the service list. This is the gas one, but let's see if it works.
Oh, you mean large uncontrolled water list one?
The hydropower example, yeah, with the.
I can do that.
Yeah. Okay, great. Yeah, this will work perfect. I was just curious that I understand like if we're looking at column G, the different attributes, and it makes sense to me that there would be, for the overall, a lore before and a lore after. The lore before and the lore after in the other attributes, is that those aren't unique values, right? Those are just going to be the exact same as the overall.
Yeah.
Right?
Yes.
I was just curious, like, is that necessary to include that, or?
It was required from the pilot, and so we included, but it's, yeah, as you're right.
Attribute level? It was required at the attribute level?
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, I'll have to go back and look at the guidelines. That's good to know. Thank you. Because I mean, it's just repetitive.
Yes.
Repetitive, right?
Hmm.
Okay, great. I'll be sure to. And it's the same for lore before and lore after. There shouldn't be a distinction between the different attributes.
Yeah, it should be the same. So I think that theoretically, lore before could be specified only for the overall.
Right.
If people are okay with not seeing lore before in each attribute.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, great. I just wanted to make sure. Yeah, because I mean, as far as the calculations are concerned, lore is applied after consequences, or after the three attributes are added together, and so
Yep.
it should only matter for overall. I'm sure that's not going to make a huge dent on your data size, but I just thought maybe that would be one place to. Okay. Yeah, Chris.
When it comes to the RRU supplemental, though, could we flip to that tab for a moment? So is it the intent that this risk information, like the pre-mitigated risk and the mitigated risk, will be detailed out for each of the RRUs?
To the extent that we have those RRUs available, right? Those project level information available.
Okay, yeah. That seems like that will be extremely useful. That way we understand, how an operator is targeting at the project level and selecting its the best benefits, the greatest risk risk reductions in selecting its projects that are part of that mitigation program. I think that's really useful for the commission and others.
Yeah, I don't want to. I mean, you've seen it in our comments, right? It's like how far available that information is, how far ahead of time that information is available. We feel that's a big issue. But like I mentioned, this table is designed so that you can fill in whatever you have according to the joint IOU proposal. Fill in whatever you have. At a later point in time, maybe slip out this table for a new updated version of this table that has more projects specified. So that's. But I don't want to give anybody the impression that we will have the data for each project 7 to 10 years out into the future.
Thank you.
Okay, great. Are there any additional comments or questions that folks wanted to ask? Technically, we still have an extra half hour. If not, I'll start to wrap us up. Let's see. I believe that this time around, the recording or the workshop summary is going to be developed by Sempra. And so, Josh, I will share the recording with you as soon as I have it available. And then I think it would be helpful if you're able to share the workshop summary with the participants here as soon as you have it available. And then we'll provide feedback and comments as soon as we can. Does that work,
Sounds
Josh?
good. Yeah, that
Okay.
sounds great. Thanks, Eddie.
Okay, great. Other than that, I don't have any other questions or comments, so I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording. And okay, should be good to